It's been a very busy offseason for the Detroit Red Wings. Some new players joining the team, some scoring heading out the door. But are the Red Wings better than they were a year ago? Ryan Fisher of Locked On Red Wings joins us to talk about that and all things Detroit hockey next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the co-host of Locked On Red Wings, Ryan Fisher. And Brian, not a dull offseason by any stretch of the imagination in the Motor City. Let's talk about some of the biggest moves the Red Wings made this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, as you put it in the cold open, they saw a lot of goals leave. Daniel Sprong, who most recently signed with the Vancouver Canucks. Shane Gostisbehere, who had 57 points, walked away as well. David Perron went to the enemy in Ottawa, signed a 2-year deal, which I'm really curious how that's going to work out in the locker room because David Perron, I don't know if you remember this, cross-checked a player in the side of the head and got a 6-game suspension trying to defend Dylan Larkin, who was knocked out cold in a game against the Ottawa Senators. So I'm curious how that's going to work out. But, you know, they saw a lot of goals walk out the door, traded away with Jake Wallman and Robbie Fabry. And so there's a little bit of apprehension with the Detroit Red Wings this offseason because Yzerman went out and replaced those goals with guys who, Vladimir Tarasenko and Patrick Kane notwithstanding, obviously, are better defensively than the guys that left. Daniel Sprong put up over half point per game. Putrid defensively. Robbie Fabry, really, he was part of this team's rebuild since the worst days of this rebuild, but he was making $4 million and was pushed on the depth chart, but was still good for about 20 goals a season. Traded away to Anaheim. Jake Wallman just set a career high in points. Sent out to Anaheim. I think Wallman was sent to San Jose and Robbie Fabry was sent to Anaheim. Getting my California teams mixed up there. But like a lot of these guys provided a lot of offense, but in return, he brought in a Tyler Mott on the bottom six, who's really, really well known for having a hard-nosed play style, really good on the penalty kill as well. Erik Gustafsson helps replace a little bit of Shane Gostisbehere's offense. Not all of it, but he's also a defenseman that you don't need to shelter nearly as much as Shane Gostisbehere. And that was kind of the game plan. And if you listen to Steve Yzerman, it makes perfect sense. The guys he brought in to this roster this year, because last year at the end of season availability, he said this team needs to get better defensively. A lot of the guys he brought in fit that description. Erik Gustafsson is going to be a power play guy that you don't have to shelter nearly as much as I previously stated. You got Tyler Mott, obviously, but it's time for this team to make room for youth. Jonathan Berggren was no longer waiver exempt, so he is going to make the team or be on a different NHL squad if they decide to waive him because he's not going to clear. Same with defenseman Albert Johansson, no longer waiver exempt. So you either got to play him or he's going to be on a different NHL team. So you're getting a little bit of, and that doesn't even mention Simon Edvinsson, who played 16 games at the end of last season and is going to slot right into a top 4 role with the Detroit Red Wings. So when there's a lot of apprehension with the Detroit Red Wings offseason free agency, I always come back with, well, we've also been asking for a youth movement, and you can't go out there and sign a bunch of veterans but also expect your youth to make the team. So it was a much more conservative offseason buy for Steve Yzerman's standards, especially once he talked about this in his free agency availability. He saw the term being handed out to a lot of, as he put it, role players, your Matt Roys, your Stevensons, your Montours, getting 7-year deals. He ain't about that life. Steve Yzerman does not like giving long-term deals. The longest contract he's given out is 5 years, and that was to Andrew Comp, and I believe Comfer last year as well. So a lot of the moves make sense if you listen to Steve Yzerman talk. He wanted the team to get better defensively, and he did that, while also maintaining a pretty offensive-minded top six and bringing back Patrick Kane for his first full season since the surgery. And Patrick Kane was a point per game with the Detroit Red Wings last year in the limited games he did play. If he can be that much or better with a full offseason of actual NHL training, you're going to replace some of those goals. Jonathan Berggren's going to replace your Daniel Sprong as a bottom six power play merchant. Like, that's the type of role he's going to play, as a bottom six scorer. Vladimir Tarasenko is a younger player than David Perron, who's going to score probably more than an aging David Perron did his final year at the Detroit Red Wings. So there is a lot of kind of exchanging this for that, and that's where it comes down to, where everything that the Red Wings did this year, did it make them better? Points-wise, probably laterally as good. Probably comparable to last year's team. I think they'll be better defensively while they lost a little bit of goals, and I think that'll even out. But I don't think that fixes the big question that Red Wings fans have, is, will this team make the playoffs? I'm a little bit skeptical still. Being laterally as good is not good enough to get them in the playoffs when you already missed the season prior.
So looking at this roster now, and you mentioned the team is getting younger, they're emphasizing defense a little bit more. What is your biggest concern when you look at this team the way it's presently constructed?
Biggest concern is still right now the structure of the defense. We saw a little bit of a shakeup on the offense, right, on how they're going to approach the bottom six. Less run and gun, as some of those wingers like to do on the bottom six, and more defensively responsible, which this team needed. But I mean, you're still looking at a top four, which has Moritz Seider, who's still contract extension pending, but who's your number one D-man. He's excellent. We all love Moritz Seider with the Detroit Red Wings. But then his partner is projected to be Ben Chiarot, who, is fine, but is he a top pair defenseman? Probably not. Second pair, you got Simon Edvinsson, who we all believe is going to be at his peak a top pair defenseman, playing his first full season in the NHL. He'll be fine there. But opposite him, you have Jeff Petrie, who in his prime, of course, was suited for the role, but not so much anymore. So your top two pairs on either side has a question mark to be like, and you're paying those question marks combined more than $6-7 million. So the top four defensive pairings still leave a little bit left to be desired. And we did see Ben Chiarot have a better second season with the Detroit Red Wings. And at the end of the year, he was paired back up with Moritz Seider, and that pair looked better than the Wollman-Seider pair did all season long. So there's a little bit of hope to be had that Chiarot and Seider will be better than when they were paired together in their first season with the Detroit Red Wings. But that second pair is still just super concerning, because Jeff Petrie, and I'm a Jeff Petrie defender because of the fact that, like, I recognize that a lot of the reason why he looked so poor was more to do with how he was utilized given his age. He just shouldn't have been put in those situations. He should be a bottom pair defenseman with the Detroit Red Wings at this point in his career, and he was forced to be a second pair, and that still concerns me. I'm also concerned about how the roster is a little bit constructed, because right now you'll have 8D and 3 goalies, because you're going to have Lyon, Cam Talbot, who's an upgrade, and Ville Husso. So with that, the math works out. You have 8D, 3 goalies, 12 forwards. You don't carry a 13th, which isn't abnormal for Derek Lalonde. He likes to run 11 and 7, but it doesn't leave you any room for your real top prospects outside of Simon Edvinsson to really get a crack at the roster. Like, where's your Carter Mazier, your Danielson, your Casper? You're getting some youth on the team, but the ones that the fans really want really are going to have to prove that they need to push somebody out to get that spot, which I guess is right, but the math is weird on the roster construction. 8D and 3 goalies is odd.
It is certainly a little unusual. Is there a little bit of impatience growing right now with Steve Yzerman and the fact that this team has missed the playoffs as long as it has?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even I try to look at the rational side of things, and I led this off by saying, like, I understand the decisions that Yzerman made this offseason, and I think it's the right decision to make based on the giant holes this team had last year. But at the same time, I don't know. None of the moves he made, I believe, made this team more than marginally better at best. And so I'm a little bit angsty too, because I'm ready for the team to make the playoffs. I'm a Red Wings fan first. I've been following this team since, 05, 06, and I'm ready for this team to get back to where they were. And last year they were so close. So to see them go into the offseason and go, okay, we're going to make these just marginal upgrades on a few positions, but not really make a big splash, I get it. I really, really do. But I also just understand the approach here. Like at some point, the youth had to make the team. And for the youth to make the team, that means you had to not sign certain veterans. That's how you keep spots open for guys like Johansson, Berggren, and Edvinsson. Like that's how it works. And when you bring in young guys on the team, and technically Berggren, this would be his sophomore season. He's already had his rookie year with the Detroit Red Wings, but we still kind of consider him youth. This is what happens, is sometimes when you bring a lot of youth in, you might expect a little bit of a step back in terms of points before you can take 2 steps forward. So while I completely get the apprehension, and I'm also my patience is beginning to thin because this will be year 6 of Yzerman's rebuild. At the same time, I understand the direction he took the team this offseason because I believe it can lead to a leap forward, but just how soon? And I'm ready for it to be soon.
Totally understandable. Brian, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Well, you can find the podcast on, of course, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you're listening to this podcast, really. You can find our social media page at @LO_Red Wings. On Twitter, we're also on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me at Brian Fisher, LORW, and my co-host Scotty Bentley is at Bentley Scotty on Twitter as well. So just check us out there.
All right, Brian, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
Of course. Thank you, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and you get their lowest price guarantee. So Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. My favorite feature on the Game Time app is the view from your seat. You go on the app and you could see a panoramic view of what you'll see from the seat you're about to buy before you make the purchase. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed.